They painted their faces white and disappeared into the mountains of a small Philippine island. And for the next 600 years, almost no one on Earth knew they were still there.
While empires rose along the coastlines, just a few kilometers away, this tribe simply walked into the forest and stopped being found.
No colonizer fully conquered them. No outside religion fully erased them. And when explorers finally did track them down centuries later, they found a people still weaving the same patterns, still singing the same night-long songs, and still guarding a version of history that almost nobody had bothered to write down. This is the story of the Yakan, the original people of Basilan Island, and the strange, quiet act of resistance that kept them alive. Basilan sits just off the southern tip of Mindanao, a small mountainous island facing the Sulu Sea, close enough to Borneo that on a clear day, the connection almost feels obvious. Long before the island had the name it carries today, the people who lived there called it Tagimaha, and they were known as the Tagimaha, a maritime trading society that moved goods and ideas across a wide stretch of the Malay world. Their boats connected them to Sulu, to Borneo, and eventually to merchants from as far away as the old kingdom of Champa in what is now Vietnam. Merchants exchanged goods, stories, languages, and beliefs across the seas. Through these contacts, the Tagimaha absorbed new weaving techniques, new decorative styles, and new ways of organizing their communities, all while staying rooted to their small island home. By the 7th and 8th centuries, Basilan had already become a working part of a much larger trade network stretching across maritime Southeast Asia. Foreign merchants passed through regularly, exchanging cloth, metal, and ideas for the island's resources. It was through these same trade routes that Islam eventually reached Basilan shores, carried not by armies, but by traders and scholars who settled among the coastal communities. Over generations, the faith blended with existing beliefs rather than replacing them outright, producing a version of Islam layered on top of much older customs. This slow, trade-driven transformation reshaped the identity of the people living along the coast, setting the stage for a split that would define the island for centuries to come. Because while the coastal communities opened themselves to these outside influences, another group made a different choice entirely. As new arrivals settled the shoreline, the original inland population retreated further into Basilan's mountainous interior, choosing distance over integration. These were the people who would come to be called the Yakan, and their name itself tells part of the story. Many researchers link it to the word Dayak, tying the tribe to ancestral roots in Borneo, while their own oral memory speaks of an even older identity shaped entirely by the island itself. What matters most is the decision they made. Rather than compete with newcomers for control of the coast, they moved uphill into terrain that outsiders found difficult to follow. That decision to retreat rather than resist directly turned out to be one of the most effective survival strategies in Philippine history. Historians openly admit they have only scattered knowledge of the pre-colonial Yakan precisely because the tribe had so little sustained contact with the groups documenting the region. When the Sultanate of Sulu rose to power in the 1700s after defeating a rival sultanate, it claimed authority over Basilan, and the Yakan technically paid yearly tribute. But that authority was symbolic more than real. Living deep in the interior, largely out of reach. The Yakan kept their own leadership structures and their own way of life almost fully intact, even while a foreign sultan's name appeared on the maps. Spanish colonizers arrived on Basilan's coast in 1842, building a fort at what is now Isabela City and attempting to extend control over the island the same way they had across much of the archipelago. But the mountains that had sheltered the Yakan from the Sulu sultans did the same job against Spanish soldiers. It would take decades, and ultimately an unlikely figure, to bring any real outside authority into Yakan territory. In the 1870s, a Christian Tagalog man who had escaped a Spanish penal colony elsewhere in Mindanao made his way into the interior, and through a combination of alliance building and force, became one of the first outsiders to establish That man later became known as Datu Kalun, and his complicated relationship with the Yakan eventually gave rise to one of the most important cultural events the tribe still celebrates today. After a particularly abundant harvest, Kalun called together the local chieftains for a gathering that mixed serious negotiation with genuine celebration, a format that struck a chord with the community. That gathering evolved over time into the Lami Lamihan festival, still held every year in the town of Lamitan. It has become the primary stage on which Yakan music, dance, and craftsmanship are performed and passed down, transforming what began as a colonial-era political meeting into a living archive of tribal identity. Isolation did more than protect the Yakan politically. It preserved an entire artistic and spiritual world that had almost nothing to do with the empires forming around them. Chief among these traditions is the katakata, a form of sung storytelling that the Yakan believe originated from beings who lived in another world entirely, separate from ordinary human experience. These are not short performances. A single katakata session unfolds only at night at a large communal gathering with food prepared by the host. And the story can stretch across multiple nights before it finally reaches its end. The singer traditionally lies on a mat, propped up by pillows, delivering the tale in long, unbroken episodes, while the audience listens in near silence. What makes the katakata remarkable is not just its length, but its function. In a community with limited outside contact and few written records, these sung epics carried the tribe's history, values, and cosmology from one generation to the next with almost no distortion. Because the format itself demanded precision and memorization. Losing a katakata singer meant losing an entire chapter of collective memory, which is why the role was treated with such seriousness. Even today, as fewer young Yakan learn the full repertoire, cultural workers on Basilan have pushed to record and preserve these performances before the last fluent singers pass away, treating them as something closer to a national library than folklore. Alongside their oral traditions, the Yakan built one of the most visually distinctive material cultures in the entire Philippine archipelago, and almost none of it required contact with the outside world to develop. Their most recognizable art form is a style of weaving that produces intricate geometric patterns inspired directly by the natural environment around them, a technique still referred to by its traditional name today. These textiles were not decorative afterthoughts. They were worn as everyday and ceremonial clothing, incorporated into a fitted blouse and matching trousers, that together formed one of the most colorful traditional outfits found anywhere in the country, instantly recognizable even to people who know nothing else about the tribe. Just as distinctive was a Yakan beauty custom that has puzzled and fascinated outsiders for generations. The application of a pale, powdery substance across the face, traditionally worn during festivals, weddings, and other significant occasions. Far from a simple cosmetic choice, the practice carried layers of meaning tied to protection, celebration, and social identity, marking the wearer as someone participating fully in tribal life, rather than standing apart from it. Combined with elaborate brass ornaments, colorful woven headcloths, and finely worked accessories. A Yakan community in full ceremonial dress presented an image entirely unlike anything found among neighboring groups, despite living just a short boat ride from several of them. The Yakan built their homes with the same independence they brought to everything else. Rather than clustering into dense villages the way many nearby communities did, they spread their houses out across their farmland, positioned just out of sight of the nearest neighbor. This was not random. It reflected a semi-nomadic, self-reliant approach to farming upland rice and other crops, where each household needed enough surrounding land to sustain itself without constant reliance on a larger settlement. Homes were commonly raised on stilts, a practical response to the island's rain and flooding. And this scattered layout made it even harder for outside powers to locate, count, or control the population in any systematic way. That same self-sufficiency shaped Yakan's spiritual life long after Islam had technically become the dominant religion among them. Rather than abandoning older beliefs wholesale, the tribe folded them into their new faith, producing a version of Islamic practice deeply layered with animist customs tied to agriculture, healing, and the natural world. Scholars studying the wider Sulu region have noted this pattern repeatedly, explaining that conversions in the area were driven largely by traveling traders rather than dedicated religious institutions, which left plenty of room for older customs to survive underneath the surface. For the Yakan specifically, this meant a spiritual identity that outsiders often misread as simple, when in reality it represented centuries of careful cultural blending. For most of the 20th century, this combination of geography, tradition, and quiet resistance kept the Yakan largely outside the awareness of the wider Philippines, let alone the rest of the world. They appeared in academic papers and regional records, but rarely in popular culture, and almost never in the kind of storytelling that reaches a global audience. Even within the Philippines, many people could name the Ifugao rice terraces or the Taboli brasswork long before they could say anything specific about the Yakan of Basilan. Despite the tribe's textiles and festivals being every bit as visually striking and historically significant. That began to shift only in the last few decades as cultural preservation efforts on Basilan gained more support, and as filmmakers and researchers started documenting Yakan life more seriously. One notable example is a short film following a young Yakan girl caught between her own ambitions and a tradition that expects early marriage. A story that captures the tension many members of the tribe now face between honoring inherited customs and pursuing new opportunities. These modern portrayals have started to do for the Yakan what centuries of official records never managed, giving outsiders a genuine window into a community that spent most of its history deliberately staying out of view. What makes the Yakan story so striking today is how much of it survived precisely because the tribe refused to fully open itself to the forces reshaping the islands around it. Other coastal groups on Basilan absorbed new religions, new trade networks, and new political structures relatively quickly. And in doing so, lost touch with parts of their older identity. The Yakan, by retreating into the mountains and keeping outsiders at arm's length, ended up preserving an unusually complete cultural record. One still visible in a festival, a weaving pattern, and a centuries-old song format that is sung almost unchanged to this very day. There is something worth sitting with in that choice. In a region where nearly every group eventually assimilated, allied, or fell under someone else's control, the Yakan simply climbed higher into the hills and kept living the way they always had. It was not a dramatic act of rebellion, and it never produced a famous battle or a legendary uprising. It was quieter than that, a slow, deliberate decision repeated across generations to protect a way of life by staying just out of reach. And because of that choice, a small island in the southern Philippines still holds one of the most complete, unbroken threads of pre-colonial culture left anywhere in the country, waiting for the rest of the world to finally notice.